Anxious attachment is one of the most annoying, heartbreaking, painful things you'll ever have to deal with. It's the one variable that for many of my clients, the hundreds of clients that I work with, is the one variable that has sabotaged a lot of their romantic connections. Whether they're trying to date, whether they're trying to find a boyfriend or a girlfriend, husband or wife, it always is one of the main variables that causes connections to end. And one of the most heartbreaking parts about it, one of the most frustrating things, is the fact that it deprives the people who have it from that which they ultimately want, that thing that they crave, connection. It stops them, it prevents them from getting the one thing that they want most out of life, to have a significant other. I've dealt with a lot of clients who have this issue. They really want to have a connection. They really want to find that special someone. But every time they think they've struck gold, they sabotage it. Now, sometimes this is because the other party is the problem in the connection. But even if that's not the case, even if they're with someone who is healthy, that anxious tendency to always, assume that they're going to be abandoned, to be hyper vigilant and to look for threats, always ends up peeking out its ugly head and causing a lot more friction and pain in the connection that's necessary. Now, I work with a lot of clients, both men and women, who have anxious attachment. And when they work with me, they normally are surprised I'm able to give them a lot of feedback, a lot of behavioral change that can help them in their connection. And they normally are confused as to why I've been able to help them where other people have not been able to, whether that be therapists, counselors, trusted advisor, someone who doesn't struggle the way that they struggle. They're surprised that I'm able to come in and kind of very quickly address and fix the problem. And they're mostly surprised that I understand them so well. And what I have to explain to them is I understand them so well and I can help them so much because I'm in their exact same situation. The reason why I'm able to understand the mind of an anxious attacher so much is because I was also anxious. Now, at this point, I'm earned secure. There's still a bit of anxiety there. I don't think anyone ever becomes perfectly secure, but it's not as much of a problem as it used to be. I remember back in my last relationship, not being super anxious throughout the entire relationship, but I noticed there were times where I added a lot more pressure and friction to the connection that was completely unnecessary, right? Being suspicious, not really trusting the love that I was given, never feeling like the love that I was given was enough, always finding another thing that was missing in the connection, because what I didn't realize was I was always, scouting for what was missing, what part of my needs wasn't being met by the person that I was with. Now, that's not to say that the relationship that I was in was a perfect one, that I had the perfect person to be with, but when I just reflect on how I showed up in the relationship, there was definitely problems that wouldn't have been there had I had a handle on my anxious attachment. And a couple of years into that relationship, I began to understand attachment styles. I saw that the lingo was starting to go viral online. I was like, what is this stuff? What is attachment style? I read the book Attached. I read all of the other attachment style books. I followed everybody online. And I started to educate myself on this world. And what I discovered was there wasn't a lot of information that helped to solve the problem. There was a ton of information to help you understand the problem. There was a ton of information to help you understand what's going on with your nervous system and where this fear of being abandoned came from and what's going on in your body when you're activated. Yeah, you can articulate it beautifully, but there wasn't a lot of people giving simple solutions. And because of that, I spent years trying to solve the problem. Years trying to solve the problem, years testing things, years experimenting, years thinking from first principles to kind of solve the problem myself that other people seemingly were unable to solve. And ultimately, I solved it. At this point in time, like I said, I'm earned secure. I'm able to connect with someone. And although I still have a bit of anxiousness, it's not a problem. I have a good handle on it. No one who I have ever dated after I made this shift would ever even assume that I came from anxious attachment origins. But again, it took years. And that relationship that I was in ultimately ended, in part because it wasn't a good fit, but the other part was I was unable to solve this problem in time. Because that's what happens, right? You start to educate yourself on these things. You start to try to get a handle on your anxious attachment because you're likely in a situation currently where you're trying to make things work. People typically don't try to research this stuff or solve this problem when they're single. It's normally and they're in a life situation where they're actively being triggered. Something actively is occurring. They're with someone, that person isn't as communicative, or that person doesn't seem to invest as much in the relationship as the anxious party does, and that leads to resentment and you expecting that that person doesn't really love you the way that they say they do. Been there, done that. That's why in this video, I'm gonna show you exactly some of the biggest shifts I made in order to start moving towards earn secure, in order to start not sabotaging the connection that I made. And hopefully the information that you find in this video is going to help you out tremendously, regardless of whatever kind of situation you're in that connects to your anxious attachment. Now, the first thing is going to be a very important one. This is a very important one. This is a tip that I share with clients that helps them out a lot. And that tip is never take an action or try to communicate when you are feeling anxious. That seems obvious, but anxious attachers typically don't do that, because when you feel that anxiety, when you feel activated, it makes everything feel urgent. You have to send that text. You have to have this conversation. You have to solve this problem. You got to do it right now, right? I like to liken anxious attachment to being possessed. How many times have you experienced that? You feel anxious, you do what the anxiety is whispering in your ear, or the demon is whispering in your ear, right? And then after you do that and things blow up, you regret it. Once that anxiety leaves, once that demon leaves and gets off your shoulder, you normally regret whatever action you took. You regret blowing their phone up. You regret sending that long block of text. Because it wasn't you. It was the anxiety influencing your perception, influencing your behavior. That's why this tip is so important, because if you can just make this shift, at least in the short term, this is not a long-term solution, but in the short term, it's going to help you out tremendously. So do not do anything while you're feeling anxious. If you must, tell yourself that you'll send that text, you'll call them, you'll try to have that conversation once that feeling leaves you, right? Just give yourself that out. Like, yeah, okay, I'll send the text, but only when I no longer feel this way. And what you'll discover is once that anxiety leaves, because it always does pass, right? It doesn't stay for long. Once that anxiety leaves, you may no longer want to even send that text. You may no longer want to even have that conversation, because it was the anxiety itself influencing you that this thing must be addressed right now. That's going to help you avoid adding more problems to the connection than necessary. Now, the second tip is a big one. This is a big one. So what I find with anxious attachers is whatever occurred most frequently in the connection begins to represent the entire relationship. So let's say you didn't get text back as soon as you would have liked. Let's say your partner is acting a little off. What anxiously attached men and women tend to do is they look at that as an example of it symbolically represents the entire relationship. This is recency bias. The thing that happened last is the most important thing. So anxious attachers tend to heighten in on that most recent occurrence, and that becomes the entire relationship. You could have had a good 2 or 3 months up until that point. You could have had a good week or so up until that point, but whatever happened last begins to be how you perceive the entire connection. So a good way to approach this is to combine it with the first rule, right? Because you'll have a tendency to want to talk about it, to have a long conversation, a long emotional conversation, which just ends up draining people over time. What you need to do instead is zoom out. In that situation, you're zoomed in. You're really close to it. You need to zoom out and do what I call look for disconfirming evidence. Disconfirming evidence is evidence that disproves whatever conclusion you came to. Because that's what we do, right? As anxious attachers, we see something that's a little bit off due to that hypervigilance, and then we create a story around it. Oh, the person doesn't care about me, right? Oh, he or she is doing this for that reason. They must have someone else. They're being weird. They're leaning out of the connection. They're becoming avoidant, right? We create a story in our head based off of that most recent data point. So in order to check that, let's zoom out and see if there's any evidence that contradicts that. Maybe they showed up for your birthday. Maybe they took you out the day before. Maybe they bought you a gift. Maybe they spent a lot of time with you, right? Maybe they introduced you to other loved ones, have found ways to integrate you into their life, right? Once you start to look for disconfirming evidence, it takes away the power of that story that you crafted, because that story is very convincing. It's very convincing, and it's probably strengthened by past evidence from previous connections. But you want to stress test it. Make sure that it is accurate. Make sure that it is true, right? So you want to look for disconfirming evidence. You want to say, okay, if you're saying this person doesn't care about you, is there any evidence to suggest the opposite? Have they shown up for you recently? Have they taken you out on any dates? Have they told you how much they care about you, verbally affirmed the connection? Once you start looking for that disconfirming evidence, you will begin to weaken that story you're telling yourself. This is a tricky one because one thing about anxious attached people, you're normally right, aren't you? You're normally right. I would say probably 80% of the time you're right. The conclusion you're coming to is an accurate one, which is why you trust the story that you've created so much. But here's the thing, you're only right about 80% of the time. There's a 20% of the time when you're not right, you're wrong. And that 20% is what kills the connection. So you want to lean into disconfirming evidence to make sure that the conclusion that you're jumping to is a real one before you address it with your partner and end up blowing everything up. The third one is probably the most important out of the whole list, because what I found with a lot of clients is they are actively in a relationship with someone who is making them anxious. What I mean by that is maybe they're with someone who's avoidantly attached. Maybe they're with someone who really isn't trying to work on the connection at all, right? They're with someone who isn't showing up in a healthy way that even a person who is securely attached would be anxious in this situation. So the third tip is don't fight uphill battles. You have to vet the people you are with. You have to make sure that even though they're not going to be perfect, even though most people out there will cause you to be anxious at some point in time, that you're not dealing with a person who is going to trigger that side of you often, okay? So you have to be thoughtful around who you are choosing, all right? You don't want to fight an uphill battle. It is possible to heal anxious attachment. It is not possible to heal it within a dynamic where the other party is regularly doing things that make you anxious. You've come to them, you've had conversations, you've told them that they need to communicate better, or you would desire them to communicate better, and then they dismiss you. If you're in that type of dynamic, there are things you can possibly do depending on how you're communicating with the person, but a lot of the times you're just in the wrong connection, okay? So if you're with someone who day after day, they're making you anxious, or they're behaving in a way that's causing you to just perpetually be anxious, they're more importantly putting you in a situation where even when you don't feel the anxiety, you still don't like the behavior, you're with the wrong person. It is best to leave that situation. Working with me or anyone else is not going to help that. It's just a signal that you're just in the wrong connection to begin with. And the last part of this is going to be, the last tip rather, is going to be, I would say, the second most important one in the list. And that is you have to build a life for yourself. The biggest problem that anxious attached people have is they make the person they're with their everything. They want to do everything with the person. They want to spend all their free time with them. They want to talk all day. Depending on how anxious you are, you may not be so extreme in this, but most of the clients I work with, both men and women, have prioritized their partner above their own personal life. They're effectively codependent. The way that their partner feels is the way that they feel in the connection. Okay, if their partner is kind of off that day, now they feel off. They're too connected. You have to have an interdependent relationship, and that is only possible when you are grounded in your own identity and your sense of self. So what does that mean? That means you have to build a full life. I always say that some of the best advice I've ever heard for anxiously attached people is for them to pretend like they will never have a romantic connection for the rest of their life. You will, but just pretend. Hypothetically, you will never have that. How can you build a life where that's not so bad? You can still be happy. Whatever the answer to that question is, you now must go do that. Make new friends, pick up more hobbies, fill up your time. Not just with busy work, because that's sometimes advice that's given to people who are anxiously attached, is for them to stay busy. That's not sustainable. You want something that is sustainable. You want the things that you engage in to fill up your cup. So just getting busy work and picking up a whole bunch of hobbies isn't going to solve the problem. Instead, you want the things that you engage in to be meaningful. They're adding meaning to your life. Because right now, probably the only thing that's adding meaning to your life is the person who you're romantically involved with. You instead want to keep that meaning that you have attached to that relationship and then add additional meaning to your life. Friends that matter to you, spending time with family that matters to you, engaging in hobbies that connect with your set of values, right? That you feel a lot of meaning behind. That way, you have built in redundancies into your life. Your happiness is not predicated on the person you're with. If the person you're with is being aloof, if they're being kind of distant, you may not be happy with that, but you have other things in your life, other resources that can kind of generate that internal happiness for you. Because nobody can be your everything. I don't care what their attachment style is. If you try to make someone your everything, you will disappoint yourself and you will have a miserable romantic life. So you have to take this seriously and start the long process of building out a full life. And that will be a great step in the right direction for you to go ahead and start moving and taking steps towards becoming earn secure. Now, everything on this list is going to be extremely helpful for you. If you start applying these things today, you will absolutely feel like you have a better manage and handle on things. At least I did, right? Now, this isn't an exhaustive list. There's a lot more details I give clients, but if you're watching this, this is something that's going to help you for right now. At best, or at worst, this is going to be a short-term solution for you so you don't blow things up right now. But I find that when I work with clients, every anxiously attached client I work with, it affects them differently. You know, it's different dynamics, different relationships, right? Different life stages. It affects everyone differently. So while everything on this list may help you, what's going to really help you is if you get personalized attention, someone to actually come in, hear your story, hear about the details of your relationship, hear your past, hear how you're showing up, what your triggers are, how you're reacting to things, and then give you a detailed step-by-step, brain-dead simple plan. A plan so simple that you'll know exactly what to do when the triggering event happens. I've had so many clients who have come to me and said that after a 1-hour coaching call with me, I helped them more than their therapist did. There was a woman recently who told me that she was married to a psychologist and currently has a psychologist and a therapist, and I helped her in more in 1-hour conversation than they had in months. There's another client who is a fearful avoidant, and they told me that the behavioral adjustments that I gave them and the tools and the strategies, the brain dead simple tools and strategies that I gave them, they've been sharing that with their friends who are also anxiously attached. It's been helping them, right? So we're making waves. We're really helping people globally here. So if you're in a situation right now where you're spiraling, you keep getting anxious, you're thinking about ending the connection, then you change your mind and want to be back in it, you're going back and forth, you're causing a lot of problems in your relationship. You can see yourself sabotaging, but you can't seem to stop yourself. You can't seem to stop causing the problem. Maybe the person you're with has even told you like, hey, you're doing a lot, right? You're doing a lot, because that's what happens, right? They end up getting drained. All the reassurance that you need, all of the communication that you need, always having this long, emotional, drawn out conversation, that's draining to people. You know, people like to say that anxiously attached people, if you watch social media, people like to frame anxiously attached folks as if they're just the innocent little doves, right? The avoidant is the evil one. But it's called insecure attachment for a reason, because it's based on insecurity. You don't just fear abandonment, you think it will happen. So you constantly look for it, right? If that's you, if you feel that you don't have a real handle on this, but you want to heal it so that it stops hurting you, I'm gonna put a link in the description for you to book your 1-hour coaching call. In this 1-hour coaching call, I will give you the clarity that you're looking for, whether you're thinking about leaving or staying. If this person is right for you or wrong for you, you'll get clarity on that. You'll get clarity on why you're doing what you're doing. And more importantly, you'll get a step-by-step action plan to solve this for good. So click the link in the description, book your call, fill out the questionnaire, and I'll see you on the other side.